When the Dallas Cowboys officially announced that Christian Parker was signing on to become the new defensive coordinator, most fans expected the usual press conference cliches. The standard, "I'm excited for the opportunity." The safe corporate language that coaches are trained to use, but instead, what came out of Parker's mouth stopped people in their tracks and immediately changed the entire tone of the Cowboys offseason. Because from the very first moment he spoke, it was clear this wasn't just another hire, this wasn't a placeholder coach, and this wasn't someone coming in quietly to follow orders because Parker didn't talk like a rookie coordinator grateful for a chance. He talked like a man who already believed the job belonged to him and who was ready to tear something down and rebuild it his way. And that alone shocked a fan base that has grown tired of cautious promises and empty optimism, because when Parker sat at the podium wearing that Cowboys logo and looked straight into the cameras, he didn't soften his words or hide behind excuses. Instead, he said that the Cowboys' defense wasn't just going to be adjusted or tweaked, but completely overhauled. From the way players think, to the way they prepare, to the way they are evaluated. And that single statement sent shockwaves through the league because it was an indirect admission that what Dallas had been doing defensively simply wasn't good enough. And more importantly, it was a direct challenge to every defensive player in that locker room, essentially telling them that their jobs, roles, and comfort zones were no longer guaranteed. And Cowboys fans instantly picked up on that tone, because for years they had watched defenses that looked talented on paper fall apart in big moments, give up explosive plays, fail to tackle, and completely collapse when the pressure was highest. And now here was a young, confident coach openly acknowledging that the culture itself needed to change, not just the playbook. And that's what made his words feel unbelievable, because the Cowboys are a franchise known for tradition, for respecting the past, for leaning on legacy. And Parker sounded like someone who wasn't interested in nostalgia at all. He sounded like someone who wanted to drag the defense into a new era, whether people were comfortable with it or not. And as the clip of that press conference spread across social media, fans immediately began dissecting every word, every pause, every expression on his face, noticing that this wasn't fake bravado or rehearsed confidence. This was conviction, the kind that comes from someone who truly believes in their system and isn't afraid of being held accountable for it. And that's why so many people started asking the same question almost instantly. Who is this guy? And why does he sound like the most confident voice the Cowboys have had on defense in years? Because Parker didn't speak like someone overwhelmed by the spotlight. He spoke like someone who had been waiting for it. And when he talked about installing an aggressive, intelligent, adaptable defense that attacks offenses instead of reacting to them, it felt like a direct response to the frustration fans had felt watching opposing quarterbacks carve up Dallas with ease. And what really made his comments hit harder was the fact that he openly talked about communication and trust, saying that a defense can't function if players are thinking instead of reacting, if they're unsure of their assignments, or if they're playing scared. And that subtle jab resonated deeply because it acknowledged what everyone watching already knew. That last season's defense didn't just struggle physically, it struggled mentally. And Parker made it clear that mental toughness, accountability, and preparation would be non-negotiable under his watch, which is why some fans immediately loved him while others felt uneasy, because bold words raise expectations, and expectations in Dallas are a dangerous thing. But Parker didn't back down or try to walk anything back. He doubled down by saying that he wanted players who loved the process, who studied film, who embraced coaching, and who weren't afraid of being coached hard. And that alone signaled that some familiar faces might not fit what he's building. And that's when the conversation shifted from excitement to intrigue, because suddenly this wasn't just about scheme. It was about identity. And identity has been the Cowboys' biggest weakness defensively, as they've spent years stuck between being aggressive and being cautious, between trying to force turnovers and trying to avoid mistakes, and Parker's message suggested that indecision would no longer be acceptable, that the defense would know exactly who it is and what it stands for, and that clarity is something elite defenses always have. And as analysts and former players reacted to Parker's comments, many pointed out that he sounded more like a head coach than a coordinator, someone who sees the bigger picture, someone who understands that talent alone doesn't win in the NFL. That structure, confidence, and buy-in mattered just as much, and that's why his words carried so much weight. Because he wasn't just selling hope; he was setting a standard, and that standard implied accountability at every level, from star players to depth guys, and even to the coaching staff itself. And that's not something you hear often from someone this young stepping into a role this high profile, which made his confidence either incredibly refreshing or incredibly risky, depending on how you look at it. Because if this works, Parker looks like a visionary, but if it doesn't, those quotes will be replayed endlessly as evidence of overconfidence. And Parker seems fully aware of that, which is what makes his approach even more fascinating, because he didn't shy away from pressure. He welcomed it, and he openly acknowledged that coaching the Cowboys means being judged under a microscope, being criticized loudly, and being expected to win immediately. And instead of pushing back against that reality, he leaned into it, saying that pressure creates clarity and reveals who's truly ready. And that mindset alone tells you he understands exactly where he is and what this job demands. And that's why fans who were initially skeptical started warming up to him, because they've heard excuses before, they've heard promises before, but they rarely hear ownership of the problem. And Parker took ownership immediately, even though the failures of the past weren't technically his responsibility. And that maturity stood out because it showed he's not interested in deflecting blame or hiding behind circumstances. And when he talked about wanting a defense that plays fast, hits hard, communicates constantly, and finishes plays with urgency, it sounded like a checklist of everything Dallas has lacked when it mattered most, especially late in games and in the postseason. And the fact that he articulated those goals so clearly made fans feel like, for once, someone actually understands what's been wrong. And as former players weighed in, many praise Parker's ability to connect with players, to teach complex concepts in simple ways, and to demand excellence without alienating the locker room, which is a rare combination, especially for a young coach. And that only added to the intrigue, because now the conversation wasn't just about what he said, but whether he could actually deliver on it, and whether the Cowboys front office would fully support his vision by giving him the personnel he needs, because bold ideas mean nothing without the right players. And Parker made it clear that evaluation would be ruthless, that reputation would matter, and that performance would dictate opportunity. And that kind of merit-based approach is exactly what fans have been begging for, because for too long, it's felt like certain players were protected or given endless chances despite repeated mistakes. And Parker's comments suggested that era might be over. And that's why his words felt shocking, because they hinted at real change, not cosmetic change. And real change is uncomfortable, especially in a franchise that values stability, but it's also necessary if the Cowboys want to stop repeating the same cycle of regular season promise followed by postseason disappointment. And as the days passed and the quotes continued to circulate, it became clear that Parker had accomplished something rare without coaching a single game. He had sparked belief, debate, and curiosity, and that's powerful because belief is the foundation of every successful turnaround. And whether you love him or doubt him, you can't ignore him. And that's exactly what the Cowboys needed, someone who demands attention, who challenges assumptions, and who refuses to accept mediocrity as normal. And that's why what Christian Parker said after signing with the Cowboys wasn't just unbelievable in the moment. It was shocking because it felt like the first chapter of something different, something bold, something risky, and something that could finally change the narrative around a defense that has been searching for its identity for far too long. And now the spotlight is on him. The expectations are sky high, and every snap next season will either validate his confidence or test it. But